mother of all that is holy, people. We live in a wacky cycle, don't we? We have rejuvenated GamerGate. We're on the verge of round 2 with Donald Trump being re-elected, only a few months away. There's a saying history doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. It seems to be the case here. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard this story by now. It's been all the rage as the spastic lemmings that make up Sweet Baby Inc. are suddenly all in a tizzy after a Chad Brazilian chap made a Steam tracker that tracks all of the games the so-called narrative development consultation studio Sweet Baby Inc. is involved with. And so, Sweet Baby Inc., in a desperate fit of utter stupidity, pleaded Kotaku, of all places, to help them save face. Kotaku? Really? That's like Harvey Weinstein hiring Ted Bundy as a defense attorney after he was convicted. Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't do what some gamers think it does. No, one company isn't forcing diversity into all of your favorite games. Now, amusingly though, both of these statements are technically true. They don't do what some gamers think they do. They do, however, do exactly what many gamers think they do. And true, it isn't one company forcing diversity, it's one of a many-headed hydra. So you're off to a great start, by the way. Written by Alyssa Mercante, of course, a woman. And this is what she looks like in a previous video. Naturally, pronouns in the Twitter bio. Hi, you can't be racist against white people. Do you see the patterns? Do you see why they get called NPCs? Which makes the point. How do you think these patterns came to portray the caricatures you see now? Anyone who's been paying attention to media the last decade can spot this. We have 10 years of additional pattern recognition to incorporate here. We know exactly what you're going to say, which is why your entire industry is dying off and you will be replaced by AI. This is inevitable. You are living on borrowed time. I don't even see people when I look at this kind of stuff anymore. God, honestly, I just see lines of code at this point. Like I said before, either cultist or machine. Either way, merely part of the bureaucracy. Starting off there, it is not the largest narrative design company. Again, we know, nor did we claim they are solely responsible for anything. Far as why people have this perception, do you think Alyssa will give an honest take or simply peddle regime talking points like the incompetent pleb that she is? Words cannot describe the level of mask-off stupid you have to be to use the very same pictures from Sweet Baby Inc.'s own frickin' website in your header and claim they aren't solely responsible for the characters and story. Again, replaced by AI, you will be. Look at this. She claims the purpose was to encourage people to avoid these games because the group had deemed SBI was pushing a woke agenda by working towards greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. Geez, I wonder where the gamers might have possibly gotten that idea from. Our mission is to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video game industry. We aim to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive for everyone.
I'm the co-founder of a little narrative development company called Sweet Baby Inc. We do narrative development in games and kind of beyond, and we try to bring a lot of inclusion, diversity, and new ideas kind of to the industry.
Might be what they put on the website, as well as the words of the fucking CEO. Its employees have faced rampant harassment as a direct result. What a surprise, no mention of the goblin of a Sweet Baby employee who harassed Brutus, the creator of the tracker, and tried to get his Steam account cancelled because how dare he show Sweet Baby Inc.'s publicly available data to people outside of their own website. Proudly on your own website, you can boast about the titles you've worked on, yet outside of this, anyone who tells the world about it, this is somehow grounds for trying to get one's Steam account cancelled. Would you care to tell us why? Again, said it before, this is how you know these people are pure evil. Oh, but what do us bad actors think companies like Sweet Baby Inc. do exactly? Because apparently we're clueless. Now, the games industry has had some troubles lately, geez, I wonder why, from massive layoffs to wildly expensive games like Suicide Squad failing short of expectations. Good lord, I have no idea why that could possibly be the case. Why, if only there was some XX variables I could point to that might explain why the gaming industry has sucked royal arsehole for the better part of a damn decade. Hey, you guys in the comment section, do you have some suggestions? Because I'm totally stumped over here. Do you want to know how stupid this one really is? Look at this. She went into the Discord and was kicked out likely because I identified myself as a Kotaku journalist. She went into a public Discord server with her real name. I don't like just insulting people, but my god, how are you supposedly a gaming journalist and you're this fucking stupid? How do you walk into a place where no one goes by their real name, only you do, you ask about this, and not recognize you're immediately going to draw attention to yourself? Never mind being a Kotaku journalist, I would have kicked you just because you're an idiot. Let's skip the pleasantries here, let's get down to brass tacks. The reason for all of this bollocks is the ESG scores. Now, why the current elite have felt the need to create this godforsaken, incompetent monstrosity of a thing, you feel free to go down that rabbit hole in your own time. You'll find yourselves wandering tunnels where you'll meet moving on. Our current elite are a bunch of incompetent, mediocre nitwits, utterly unimpressive specimens. Their ancestors would be ashamed and mortified at the pathetic state of their descendants. Trust me, the current elite, deep down, are painfully aware of their inadequacies. They are riddled with insecurities. The lesser sons of greater sires, if you will. And the peons who gravitate towards this ideology, same type of problems. Unimpressive, inadequate, riddled with insecurities. This gimmick is a product of politics, and the unimpressive ones are more than willing to sell their souls to the regime in exchange for petty recognition. With glee, they accepted the mark of the beast. These people have decided to pervert their very visible form, their representation, and those of us who are sentient and sane can see that mark in every ill deed they try and pull, and we are averse to the march of evil and do not take kindly to its intrusion. They have decided to turn damn near everything that isn't European into a potential Trojan horse that carries this tainted evil. This is why so many people are now averse to anything that isn't European. It has the potential to be the carrier of a great scourge. Now, depending on how far back you want to go, I do find it rather funny the talking points of the current regime is Europeans are wickedly evil and only got to the top of the food chain via oppression and power and nothing else. Yet every time you see anything else take the reins, it decays into a cesspool of incompetence and corruption, which would lead an honest soul to the obvious conclusion that the disparity in intelligence and morality does result in the creation of objectively better human beings. I'm a South African of European origin. I am hiding a power level so potent, were I to unleash it, I would recreate Raiders of the Lost Ark. But anyway, back to the swill of an article. Apparently, they do not force game studios to include diverse characters and storylines. No. They're a narrative design company, meaning their work is focused on writing stories and dialogue, and not simply being a DEI consultancy firm. Yet according to the CEO, Kim Belair, one of the things they offer is cultural or authenticity consultations. As if that isn't the exact same freaking thing. But the perspective is never that we're coming in and injecting diversity. Really, Kim? Is that so?
And I once worked on a project where they had an all-white cast, and they expressed their desire, like, okay, we need to mix it up a bit. How about this character's kind of like stereotypically French? So they have a beret, and they have like a striped shirt. And I was like, okay, if you need to do that, can we at least make them a person of color?
News just in, these wankers are pathological bullshitters. They lie constantly. Let's stop the bollocks here, shall we? This article is not going to say anything useful that we couldn't immediately finger as a giant pile of flaming wank. Instead, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to debunk all of this BS via the words of the CEO herself of the damn company. But here is where I deviate from, I would say, most people. So I want to break the rest of this video down into two segments. First, we'll be using her own words, and then what I really think of this woman.
I'm Kim Belair. I'm a writer, I'm a narrative designer, I'm extremely nervous, and I'm the co-founder of a little narrative development company called Sweet Baby Inc. We do narrative development in games and kind of beyond, and we try to bring a lot of inclusion, diversity, and new ideas kind of to the industry.
There you go. She is literally telling you from the get-go her job is to force DEI. Simple as. Now let's listen to her supposed mind-fucking of an upbringing.
For a little bit of background on me, I've been a professional writer for about 12 years, but I've always written stuff. I think that's always the way. But when I was a kid, and I want to start at the beginning here because I think that it's important to kind of give context to the way I learned about representation as a woman of color, and I think the way that a lot of marginalized people kind of get socialized when it comes to topics like this.
As a woman of color, a dead giveaway you're dealing with an indoctrinated drone.
So when I was small and starting to kind of express myself creatively in either writing or stories or art, I wrote about myself a lot. And I would put myself into a lot of art, into a lot of narratives, and I put my family and people who look like me in all of these cool scenarios. And I was telling all these stories where I got to see myself, I got to see people who look like me, and kind of a rainbow of people who were kind of adjacent to me.
People who look like me, rainbow of people adjacent to me. What the hell does that even mean? Looking at you, you're pale as hell. How does a rainbow of people adjacent to me simply not span damn near everyone else around you?
In a lot of ways. And I think it was really neat, and I was really fostered in that. So when I hit elementary school, I think that I was free to tell those stories because a lot of the stories that you hear in elementary school are about like, we should be friends with everyone, we should be inclusive, we should preach equality and build communities. And I think this was really, really wonderful.
Elementary school, so you were what, 5 or 6 years old?
But then I got to high school. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I got told that the stories that I was writing and the things that I was creating for and about people who resembled me weren't not real stories and they were not right stories. And this was to the point that I received a list that I'm sure many of you have received that was, here's a list of authors and stories that are legitimate.
By the way, I don't believe for a second any of this is true. You were given a list by who?
Here's a list of people and stories that are important. And as you can imagine, they were, mostly men and almost exclusively white. And so were the subjects of all of these stories, with a couple exceptions of people who were there to teach lessons to the white male characters, or people who were there to express pain, or people who were there to be the target of some kind of hate or conflict. And if we ever did read, here's a book by like an African-American author, here's a book by a woman, here's a book by a Japanese author, it was for a lesson that was about, this is what life is like as a woman, this is what pain and suffering is like as a black person, this is what pain and suffering is like as a Japanese person. And so through that, and kind of unconsciously, I started to learn that books by and about white men were literature. They were classics, they were important, and everything else is just special interest. They're very, very niche. And then meanwhile, there's like a young me, and all I wanted out of this whole life was to be a writer. And I wanted that so bad that I kind of said, okay, well, what do I need to be legitimate? And I just internalized everything that I had learned. And I did that for years. And I spent like actual years just writing about white men, because I thought, okay, I'm making art now, because I can look at the stories that are being told, that are being held up as legitimate and as classic, and they look like the stories that I'm telling. And for so many years I did this that I think it was probably only in my early to mid 20s that I started to realize that I had internalized this like deeply, deeply uninteresting idea that in terms of narratives and stories, white and male are, neutral and universal.
Okay, I find this perspective fascinating as well as completely insane, so I'm going to try and tell you guys my take on this. The fact that she didn't tell us who gave her that list or who told her her stories are illegitimate leads me to believe, very likely, she was just some nerdy chick who got bullied for it. Whether her stories suck, I will leave that up to you.
And representation is this like very, very scary and very uncertain thing. And if we do it wrong, or if we don't do it, accurately, or if we kind of take a risk, we might get shouted down, and that fear is enough to stop us. And I think like that sucks. And it's such a bummer because it's the only way sometimes that we end up talking about it. We end up saying, we're going to share our stories of microaggressions, which I am going to do today, but we share stories of trauma and of doubt. And when we're dealing with narratives in advocacy, we end up going like, okay, these stories are stirring and they're beautiful, but they're also very sad and very heartbreaking.
If you're listening to this as a gamer thinking, What the hell are you talking about, you idiot? What does this have to do with games? Do you understand we play games to be entertained? We couldn't give less of an ass about any of this nonsense. Make the game entertaining and shut the hell up. Yeah, there's a lot of that in this. Most of this is just her rambling like an unhinged lunatic.
So let's talk about video games.
You will do no such thing.
And I think that the way that we talk about this kind of thing is itself a problem. We need sensitivity readers. We need risk assessment. And these are like, again, important services that I literally like list on every PDF that I send out to be like, hey, I can do risk assessment and sensitivity reading. But I think when we do that kind of work and we make it seem like what we're doing is, you know, being very careful, being very scared, we end up just kind of sanding down all the rough edges instead of building something new and building something out. And that means that we feel daunted when we discuss representation because we talk a lot about representation as the mitigation of pain, but we don't talk about representation as a creator of joy.
Now this woman is coming off the heels of telling a story about mitigating harmful vocal interactions in a dating simulator. We don't talk about representation as a creator of joy, because it never is a creator of joy. It's nothing more than a token to shore up an ESG score, and we know this.
Because I would genuinely love, just once, to be called into one of these consulting sessions, and instead of being asked like, hey, can you tell us how this is going to hurt people like you, just be asked, hey, what would you like to see people like you do in this game? What experiences can people like you bring to the world of the game that we haven't seen before? What's a cool thing that you want to see from characters who look and act like you?
Firstly, try not selling yourself as a sensitivity reader and one who does risk assessment then, you twat. I would like to be asked about stuff I don't market myself as. Yeah, that seems to be kind of a you problem. Heaven's sake, secondly, I find this perspective, once again, to be completely insane. If someone came to me with these kinds of questions, I don't think I would necessarily be offended, but I would look at them like they just escaped a mental asylum. We don't fucking play games to be represented, you moron. We play games to be entertained. Which character most looks like me? Agent 47. I've never once played Hitman, even once, and thought, my good God, a suited man with a shiny noggin, I can die happy now. No, I just played the game, you lunatic. Like, imagine if someone came to me and said, you, white man, what could we possibly put into this game we haven't thought of before? Pray tell, what would you like your royal whiteness to see? Do tell us your secrets, so we may sell it to other white men like yourselves. I would probably clonk them over the head with a spoon like I'm on the set of Fawlty Towers.
And it's not the way we're taught to talk about it, but I think it could be. Because even when we're doing narrative design, we're looking at archetypes every time we want to have a set of answers, right? We're looking, this is what a rebel would do. This is what a jerk would do. This is what a more straight-laced person would do. And I think I would love to start thinking about more like, what option can we make for people who haven't been seen? What can we add that provides a new perspective that we've never explored before? Because I think if we prioritize joy and start to frame representation as, you know, a new form of innovation rather than as pain avoidance and like surface level diversity, we're going to actually start to win a few more battles and generate moments of actual happiness.
Moments of actual happiness. Look at that. Prioritize joy. Frame representation as a new avenue of storytelling. This is the kind of stuff that makes regular people think you're nuttier than squirrel shit and you have an agenda, because no one else thinks this kind of bollocks. You make it sound like humans of a different melanin count can't relate to one another. You make it sound like they're not even the same species. There's a reason why people think you're nefarious, because no one but the most niche kind of freaks think like this. Oh, the next bit is very telling though, because she is going to drop the mask and basically tell us she wants forced diversity.
So this is kind of all up in the air, but I want to give an example of what these kinds of wins can look like, or at least what they have looked like in the past for me. And I kind of want to say, okay, imagine me now as a player, because this is my go-to example, and it's something that like I talk about all the time, and it's the first time that I ever made a black character in a video game. And this is genuinely embarrassing to relate to a crowd of people, but for a really long time before this, when I was offered like a character customization screen, I was like, well, I can't put myself in there because that that's weird and not what video games are.
I don't believe that for a single second. Never once has she ever thought this. Ever. That is a total lie. The whole point of the character design is to give the player the choice.
And so I made some stubbly white dude protagonists, even when I had every option available to me, because I didn't want to feel like I was putting too much of myself into this world where I didn't belong.
I'm beginning to believe you just really crave white power overpowering you.
And it's wild to think about. I just created Nathan Drake, and was like, go, explore every game. But anyway, the first time that I actually made a black protagonist was in Mass Effect in 2010. And that felt really, really great. And I know that everyone at GDC has seen a lot about Mass Effect. So many talks talk about Mass Effect, so I think it's very important. But for anyone who's never played it, I'm just going to give you a little rundown of the first playable area. Basically, your fully customized Commander Shepard has to enter a space station and rendezvous with two characters, Jacob Taylor and Miranda Lawson. But you meet Jacob first. And for those of you who don't know, Jacob is a black man. He's a Marine. And he's your first kind of point of contact. So your first interaction with him, you're crouching behind cover and you're having a close quarters conversation. And when this happened in the game, it was this really powerful and remarkable moment for me, because it was two black characters talking one-on-one, and neither of them is cast as a criminal. They're not a sidekick, they're not a savage, they're not a stereotype, they're not a gang member. And they're the only two people on screen in this moment talking about something much greater than them. And it was just really, really, really nice. I left off a really. But I was so happy about this moment that I actually took my phone out to text my white best friend, and I was like, wow, it was really just cool to see this scene in this game. Can you believe it?
As far as games go, this is genuinely one of the saddest things I have ever seen in my entire life. That you had to phone your white friend to tell her that you were moved by two characters with a similar colored pixel is really, really depressing. If this is something that genuinely moves you, you need to get a life.
And I was halfway through the text when I realized oh, she isn't going to see that because her Shepard doesn't look the same as mine. But I texted her anyway because I thought, you know what, I'm going to share this moment of joy for me, and she's my best friend, so she has to be happy about it. And her response, while not surprising, was still very touching because she said, I've never seen that either. And holy moly, that's cool.
I think Harmful pointed this out as well. It's only cool to you because you've never seen this. If it was everywhere, no one would care.
And I told some other friends at that point. I was kind of excited about it, and they weren't all black, these friends. They weren't all targeted by this moment that I had experienced, but they all felt the same thing when they heard me tell my story, and when they heard that it was a new kind of term, and that the general idea was, holy moly, representation is cool.
Or perhaps they were just humoring you because they think you're nuts, thinking Kim has several screws loose and she needs a boyfriend.
But in my Mass Effect experience, this is almost an accidental form of representation because it's something that's a possibility. It's not guaranteed for any player depending on the kind of character and the Commander Shepard that you make. So I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if this wasn't an accident, but it was actually the intention of the game designers? What if they actually said, you know what, we're going to set out to create a moment of joy in people who look like this, people who feel represented by this.
Wouldn't it be amazing if this was an intention? There's your false representation. They don't want to see themselves. No. They want to force others to notice them. Every damn time, it is always the most insecure, unimpressive people who deep down scream, oh, please notice me! Saddest people on the face of the earth.
And that, I think, would be amazing, and it's totally possible for us. Because these are things that we can actually create as designers and as writers and as creators. And not only are they new, but they're very, very narratively compelling, and I think that that's ultimately what we should strive for. Because the newness of it works not only for those who are, being immediately targeted, but it works for everyone in that group, everyone who kind of receives it and who's never seen this before. Because keep in mind that when it's new for you, odds are they've never seen it either.
Again, this doesn't tell me anything. Representation is not a story in and of itself. It's a detail. It's just a variable. It's not compelling simply because something different is there. If you're featuring a person of color without making them do anything interesting or thought-provoking, They're just there. You're tokenizing them, or in this case, using them as ESG pawns. You're just using their form as a way to make money. That's kind of screwed up. Again, only the cringiest freaks of society would find this BS appealing. The vast majority of society would think this lass is wired wrong.
So you're not actually catering to one tiny group, you're catering to everyone who's going to be playing it. It's across the board. And that's a lesson, I think, that we keep failing to teach. Because we keep saying, okay, this one's for you guys, this one's for you guys, and like this one over here, like you can have it. But we can't keep looking at representation as like we're catering to a tiny little corner or like a direct marketing effort. It's what everyone, I think, or hope wants as an audience. And stepping back, it's not just, I don't just hope actually. I actually think, okay, we all do want this. And I think, you know, especially the people in this room can actively say, yeah, that's what we want to achieve. But then the question is begged, why aren't we doing this? Like why, when we're talking about it, when we're so enthusiastic about it, what's stopping us? Like why are we still being told, oh no, that's not what players want? Why do I keep hearing that it's like an uphill battle for people to bring representation to what should be a very inclusive environment of creativity?
Okay, once again, you're not fucking saying anything. This is just word salad. Let's use the Mass Effect example, right? You made a black character, you saw two black people and apparently lost your freaking mind over it. This particular moment is entirely personal to you. Damn near everyone else would think you're sad or insane for reacting the way you did. That moment is not marketable because, once again, there is nothing compelling about it.
And I think, you know, there are a lot of answers. There's the fact that, you know, the industry is stuck in its ways. The industry isn't as diverse as it should be or could be. We're all socialized in this society to kind of act against it and to fall into what is normal. And there's like a dozen other answers that are all like variations on those themes.
Yeah, and all of those themes all revolve around a single question. Does it make money? And if the answer is no, then it can fuck off.
But kind of like a pseudo fun fact about me, that's slightly fun, is that I actually have a marketing degree. And so I want to put on that like very mercenary hat for a second and talk about the way that we decide how we're going to sell the art that we make and how we're going to approach the audiences that we make it for.
If the past 5 years is anything to go by, you have failed miserably at that.
Because I think so often when people like us get told, you know, from higher ups or from society at large, this isn't what players want, it's not a conversation about content, it's a conversation about demographics.
Yeah, it is, and the demographic in question is, are they paying customers? What the hell is wrong with these people?
And I think that in our industry and in so many creative industries, if you want to look at film and television and any art form, we start treating our core demographics as a fixed and static value, something that does not want to change and something that is locked in place. So despite like the changing face of audiences, despite the changing face of conferences like this one, we still look at our core demographics and say, okay, they're white, cis, hetero males.
Okay, question for you. The creations of the Far East are not made for the heterosexual Western market, and yet they do incredibly well in the West. Why do you think that is?
And we cater almost exclusively to them. And the problem is that we don't just cater to them like, you know, here's something that we think you'll enjoy. We cater to them the way that we cater to like a picky baby. We feed them the same thing that we know that they love, and we keep on feeding it. We're like, here you go, you love it, eat this, eat this, eat this, so that then when they get anything else, they react as a picky baby would, which is be like, oh no, thank you, I do not want this. And we've actually done this so long that what we're doing is creating an entire nation of picky babies, and they make us scared to deviate from what we actually want to do.
Listen here, you little wannabe social engineering psychopath. I am your boss. If I tell your ass to jump and dance, you say, yes sir, how high? I am not compelled to buy the slop you vomit up.
But I do like to imagine that when we look at white guys, and there's several of you here, I think that when we look at you, we say, okay, you can't possibly enjoy this. But I think they want also, and maybe you want also, to experience new and different stories. I think we need to step out of this rule that like white men can enjoy fantasy worlds, aliens, sci-fi, monsters, anything, so long as it's through a lens that looks exactly like them.
Again, no one else but you cringe fringe freaks think like this. No one gives a flying ass about representation. Just make a good story and shut the hell up. Let's take me, for example, right? San Andreas is probably my favorite game. The protagonist CJ is black. I have never played San Andreas thinking, man, I would enjoy this game so much more if Grove Street families were all white. Never thought that. I mean, look at the white boys in that game. A corrupt cop, some hippies, an uber nerd, a musician, his band's manager, a coked out lawyer, Italian mobsters, and a Fed. None of that represents me in any way, and I don't care, because the game was fun. Does anyone remember when games were focused on that? My God, it feels like forever now.
Because if that's the kind of person that we're always going to cater to, you're never going to innovate. You're never going to change things. You're just going to keep feeding the picky baby. And we cannot continue to try to create art under a system that is going to bar innovation for fear of a picky baby throwing a tantrum.
Okay, let me sum up my attitude with a question from Eddie Griffin.
I say, who gives a fuck who the message is? Did you get the message?
Same concept. Give me the good narrative. I do not care about the vessel as long as they are compelling. Why is this so hard to understand?
And I really don't think that it's impossible to change this, because as like a woman of color, I have played with and like empathized with a lot of white men. I have played as Kratos, who's like literally white. I've played as Nathan Drake. I've played as Arthur Morgan, and I've loved it. And I don't think it's like pie in the sky thinking to go like, hey, maybe we can invite white dudes to play as other people and experience different things through someone else's eyes.
Did it ever occur to you personally that when it comes to these characters, it's not about story and narrative developing? You didn't empathize with these characters. No, you just want a strong masculine white guy to bang you. You can't translate that into the same desire to a male player because we don't have ovaries, you lusting dope.
And if they don't like it, we have to start thinking we're not losing, they're losing, and we're losing because we're going to let them stand in the way of our progress and our innovation.
I legitimately despise these entities because they're absolute parasites, standing in the way of our innovation. Who the fuck do you think you are? How dare you, a woman, talk down to me, a man, as if I'm something to be molded? I'm South African, there is nothing you can do to alter my thinking, but believe me, there is an arsenal of ways I can screw with yours.
And I think that we need to stop thinking that our core marketing demographics have to define the exact demographics of our playable characters and of our cast.
They never did, ever. This is a problem entirely of your own insecurities and or ideology, and possibly only made to give worthless people like yourselves employment because you're bureaucrats. In the private sector, you would never achieve success because you're barely qualified to do anything.
If we start having these conversations as facets of narrative, as facets of marketing, as gameplay, as art, I think that we're actually going to be able to move beyond it, because when we sequester advocacy into this one series, what we risk is preaching to the choir, and while you guys already know this because you're here, what's old to us can be innovative to somebody else. And that's still incredibly important. All of these things that I'm saying today, I'm sure you understand, but you can go out into the world now and other people will hear it from you.
Do you even understand that most people will listen to you and will likely think you're a complete lunatic, or will be bored out of their minds listening to you drone on and say nothing? I can guarantee you half of my audience are bored out of their minds listening to you and are going to be pissed off at me for making them suffer through this, and they very much want me to call you a
Because ultimately, I think that is what we need to figure out. It's how to bring these discussions out and make innovations in content like the way we make them everywhere else in our industry. But how do we do that? I think it's one thing in narrative, because honestly in narrative it's a little bit easier to implement because we have the power to go oh, we can build choices that consider marginalized identities and just write them into our work. We can decide to tell stories that present very rare narratives and representative experiences. And we can kind of work on detokenizing our minority characters.
Here's the thing though. You are actively telling us you don't do any of this. You spoke about going to people of color and asking them, what do you want your race to do? Authenticity, experiences of marginalized people, all of this kind of nonsense. You are not the storyteller, you are just a cheap second-rate pandering hack. That is why whenever people see your infecting tentacles on any titles, see anyone that isn't European, they already know exactly what that character is going to be like because you actively try to portray them as authentic as possible, or if we strip away the BSing language and go for real speak, cliched caricature.
So, first and foremost, if you're in creative development, if you're building a world and a story and you're including characters and concepts that are borrowed or inspired by or based on the lives and the lived experiences of marginalized people, firstly, I would say do not be afraid to create moments that are intentionally targeted and designed to create joy in the marginalized.
Do you see right there? Notice the start. She lists the variables she believes are applicable only to that group, which means that race of characters is only going to adhere to those stereotypes. You're pigeonholing them to a caricature under the guise of authentically representing them by only using those stereotypical tropes. Are they going to appreciate it because it's objectively good or because you're pandering to them?
They are going to appreciate this on a level that your core audience won't, but it doesn't mean that you're going to exclude your core audience in doing that.
Now keep in mind what she just said.
Do not make it so that marginalized people, when they're playing your game, have to do all of the work to create representation themselves by creating that custom character. And
I literally cannot comprehend this perspective.
I had to include this moment because I must have watched this bit at least 15 times. It cracks me up every time. And I concur, I also can't comprehend this perspective. Especially because earlier she was talking about wanting forced representation, but now when it's a custom-made character, you don't want them to do all of the work. Half of the fun is making the damn character.
also, don't fall into this trap that I think a lot of people fall into, which is they think, okay, don't worry. We can include everyone by making this like single default universal experience that is universally representative.
True.
Because usually like all that means, as it did in the dating example, is that you're aiming at your core demographic and you're probably invisibly leaning towards the dominant societal voice, even if you don't realize it.
I want you all to pay really close attention to what she just implied there, because a few moments ago, she said don't be afraid to create moments that are intentionally aimed at the marginalized because they will appreciate it. How and in what way, she can't possibly know that, but the core audience, which is code for European male by the way, will not be alienated. But if you make the universal representation, you're leaning towards the dominant narrative without realizing it, whatever the hell that means. Earlier in the talk, the European male was in her mind inculcated as the universal neutral. Normal people can experience connections and emotions irrespective of race. People can appreciate universally recognized values, things like honor or duty or respect or valor. She, however, does not think this. She thinks the European male is such a magnificent being of great complexity that you minorities are too primitive and stupid to understand us. No. You are simple-minded creatures and unable to relate to anything that doesn't look like you. You must be catered to exclusively through pandering and stereotypical tropes in order to authentically represent you, because you are not smart enough or deep enough to appreciate anything else. Again, she talks about de-tokenizing minority characters, yet you can infer from her own perspective and intentions she does the exact opposite of that. I wonder if she realizes just how offensive that actually is. Which, if you're making a game with a custom character, makes no freaking sense, because presumably someone who isn't European can only act as whatever that race is in her world, and a custom character is supposed to represent what the player wants them to look like. It doesn't magically change the story to be a caricature of a certain race. It doesn't change anything about the character, only the external.
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want. Because they have to consider, like, I say that a lot as a joke, but it's actually very, very true, because if you start to consider the people who are player and audience facing and who have to deal with mitigating harm and with keeping the sentiment around their game and their project positive, there's like a genuine value that you can impress upon them with both ethically and financially.
That's obviously the clip that went viral. You're an actual parasite. Do you see why this company is utterly despised?
If you're in communications or you're part of that like scared marketing group, assume your players want new stories and treat representation as a facet of innovation, as a selling point. Leverage your game's ability to explore new perspectives.
Okay, this right here. This is why I personally want to scatter these groups into the sun. If anyone tells you, assume your players want X, that is a nutcase selling you some snake oil. No sane person would ever assume their potential customers want something. You are here to make money first and foremost. Your job is not to assume. Your job is to know and then provide accordingly. Secondly, you're an actual parasite. Stop treating your worldview like it's a market signal. It's not. You're a cancerous infection and no more. During this near 30-minute ramble, at no point have you made even a single case for why anyone should even listen to anything you have to say in terms of what actually makes a good story, let alone what would sell games. You have done nothing more than make absurdly stupid claims that representation is somehow cool and innovative, which once again is not a compelling story driver, it's merely a variable. Even the characters that you supposedly like Nathan Drake and Kratos, you never said why you liked them, just that they were white, and you did. She is nothing more than a less than average peon, an unimpressive midwit of a specimen. Totally unremarkable, nothing special. She speaks exactly like a bureaucrat, just rambles on and on and on and says nothing of value. I could sum up this entire talk in a single sentence. I want to force representation with stereotypical tropes because I think it is good for the industry. That's it. That is this woman's entire gimmick boiled down to one sentence. No more, no less. Now, having said all of that, let me offer a completely 180 perspective. I don't think she is nearly as diverse as she claims she is, and I will tell you why. Completely divorce yourself from the politics of the situation and just examine her alone. Take her at face value. Now, she claims when she was a young'un to have written stories where she saw herself and people like her. You write about what you know and what you see. This is fairly normal. But once she got to see higher-end literature, she changed. Now, the marginalized and niche perspectives of the authors in high school, normal, rational people would recognize you live in a country made by and primarily composed of European males. I would guess you were so awestruck by the dominating magnificence that is the European male, because we are the dog's bollocks, we are top of the hierarchy after all, that you as a writer could recognize that we are admired for being the best, and you took a shine to us. Or you interpreted us as a key ingredient to success, and so that is why you chose to write about us. There's very obviously a beneficial relationship to white men in her mind. She can say, oh, I was told all the great works of art are only of white men. But like Harmful Opinion says, that is what she took from that. And then for years and years on end, she wrote a lot about white men. Why? I suspect because she was moved by us. Again, pretty normal. She talks about needing representation and relatability. All of that nonsense, that's politics. She claims to have played white male characters and enjoyed them. So she can relate to, or at the very least enjoy, a character like any other consumer. So she's not nearly as screwed up as she portrays herself to be. But if you watch her, you can see where she speaks like a normal person, and then she will glitch into this political nutjob, which is rather jarring actually. Now here's a perspective to consider. European civilization, our works, our magnificence is so daunting and awe-inspiring. It's like a scar on certain people's souls that make them feel inadequate, especially when their civilizations haven't done jack shit. Look at all of human history. Women crave power. They are attracted to men of power. She called Boromir and Nathan Drake her two boyfriends. Wow, a woman is attracted to handsomely rugged and masculine men. What a shock that is! She has the same type of energy as the self-inserts. It's not about wanting to see themselves. No. It is about having other people they crave notice them. It's not that they hate Europeans. It is that it drives them insane that we don't care to notice them because they aren't really impressive in any way. It makes them sad that we don't give them attention. She's just a typical meh kind of chick who wants the affection of a guy she admires. On the apolitical side of her exists that, the totally normal girl that craves the attention and affection of a competent man. Yet on the political side exists this utterly irrational currency that actively fights against the natural order, that teaches these people that we are to be despised for some bizarre reason. They still want to be noticed, but within the feasibility of the currency. Basically, notice me for representative reasons X, Y, and Z, a currency that is in accordance and compatible with the social status of the regime. Because if you're a person of color in this space who isn't lockstep in line with the regime, if you adopt the traits of, say, the Smithsonian concept of white culture, you're some kind of a sellout. But only to the cringe fringe. To everyone else, assimilation is, normal. And this currency model is ever present. It exists in a state of constant friction with the natural way of life, which is to find a man and settle down. This is why they all appear so mentally unstable. They're essentially symptoms of a completely unnatural way of life. In that sense, I don't really even look at these characters like they're real people with a sense of agency. Their behavior is 100% a product of the environment they find themselves in. Nothing about them is organic in any way. No, they're more like manifestations of a much, much deeper problem. Again, this is political. None of them have any real conviction in any of this crap, mind you. This cause is not even noble. Even they know this. There is no empirical evidence that this is beneficial for society either. Outside of a system where that belief has its rewards, it will cease to function. What they really are nothing more than power amplifiers for the cathedral. The white male bashing is a total farce as well. Take a look at how many women of color scream, "Oh, my white supremacy." Behind closed doors, that white power is laying pipe. If you remove the ESG nonsense, would any of them behave like this? Well, for one thing, their bureaucracy wouldn't even exist. They'd be out of work, let alone behave like this. Now make of that what you will. This video has gone on for far too long anyway. Oh wait, one last thing. Until the industry is more willing to openly discuss development processes, the lack of transparency will continue to be used as a straw man for bad faith arguments that characterize DEI as an imposition by nefarious unseen forces rather than an effort to cultivate a more accurate reflection of the world around us. So you are admitting it is real and it is actively engaging in forcing narratives to reflect the real world. It's not real and it's not happening, but if it was, it's totally a good thing.
I hate you with every inch of my body.
Amen to that. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.